Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Southeastern 14 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We've got a special one for you today. When you hear this, I'll be on the way to Hoover to cover the tournament, and so we're doing this Monday afternoon. The big news across the league: Texas A&M has gotten rid of baseball coach Rob Childress. Here to talk about it, Olin Buchanan. Olin's been a friend of mine for a while. He does a fine job over at TexAggs.com, where he is the assignments editor. He's a columnist. He's the TV guy, everything they do over there, and they do a whole lot at TexAggs.com. Olin's got his finger in. Olin, thanks for joining us today on what I'm sure has been just a crazy week for you guys.
Well, it's been busy, but it was not unexpected, so we were prepared.
Yes, and we've been hearing things, too, for a while. When did you get the sense that it was over for Rob Childress at Texas A&M?
Well, quite frankly, at the before the season started, his contract had not been renewed, and so you knew that this year was going to be a very pivotal whether or not he would come back. And they got off the season, lost their first two of the first three to Xavier, and really got off to a slow start. So throughout the season, there was speculation that that there's a good chance he wouldn't be back. And then when they started struggling in SEC play, it became more and more apparent.
I want to ask you something, because sometimes the best perspective is the one where you're right there. Sometimes the best one is when you're further away. And I don't know which is the right one in this case, but I will give you the 30,000-foot view. As somebody, I've watched a good bit of Texas A&M baseball across the years. Not as much this year because A&M just frankly quickly from that Xavier series on, and when it went and lost the first series to Florida, just wasn't as relevant as some of the other teams. But I look at A&M, and look, I see some things I didn't like. I couldn't believe the pitching was as bad as it was, and we'll get into that in a minute. But from the bigger picture, okay, the top three teams in terms of NCAA tournament streaks coming into this year were Florida State, which I think is 42-ish, which laps the field. Vanderbilt second, I think, at 14, and A&M, I believe, one behind at 13. If those numbers aren't right, they're close. So looking at it from that picture, it is excruciatingly hard to get to the tournament that many straight times, all those under Rob Childress. And look, I know A&M has had a great baseball program and all kinds of resources, but from that perspective, was the firing a little bit harsh given that the track record had been so solid for so long?
Well, maybe, but you got to look at it and understand that we're an hour from Houston, and Houston arguably is for producing baseball talent might be the greatest metropolitan area in the country. If not, it's certainly in the top two or three. And so I think you expect to get into the tournament. And so what it happens here is you ask yourself, much like they did in football a few years ago when they hired Jimbo Fisher, you ask yourself, well, it's been 16 years. You're good, but not great. And are you comfortable with where you are as a program, or do you expect more? And I think the answer just came down to, they expect more. They expect to, they expect to get to the tournament. They expect to host, which is something they haven't done a whole lot of. So being good enough to get into the tournament, that's fine. But they really do expect more than that here. And quite frankly, they've had some good moments under Rob Childress, but they've been denied getting to the College World Series many times by TCU and Rice and other teams in our own state that are recruiting the Houston area better than Texas A&M is, quite frankly. So I think that is the reason that, quite frankly, said, been pretty good. We expect to be better, and maybe with somebody new in charge, they can have an opportunity to reach the full potential of the program.
Olin, that program was good when it was in the Big 12. It's been good since it's been in the SEC. But the SEC, I think in most people's opinion, the ACC people may want to argue, but I think they're just wrong. That the SEC is the best conference in college baseball. And I'm just wondering, has that changed expectations for Texas A&M baseball?
No, but I do think that the move is one of that move from the Big 12 to the SEC. I think Rob may have been the victim of it because they were 3-0 against the Big 12 this year. They beat Texas, they beat Oklahoma, and they beat Baylor. So I just think that they've been a good program for a long time. They moved into the SEC, and they had some good moments. I think they won a conference championship once. I know they won the tournament one year, but they just haven't been as consistent. And again, when you look around some of the good programs in the SEC, a lot of times they've got Texas kids doing real well. Arkansas, for instance, LSU. And, that becomes quite frustrating when the guys, again, from your own backyard are leaving and beating you. And you've got, and I know this is a criticism. I'm not so sure how accurate it is, but it's, you're getting beat by Texas kids. And a lot of time you have junior college transfers from Nebraska on your roster. And I think people are trying to, come to grips with that and figure it out as why are these kids that are basically in our own backyard leaving the state and sometimes staying in state but not coming here, and you're playing with guys that transferred from a junior college in Nebraska or from lesser programs and lesser conferences. We've had guys from Incarnate Word and places like that playing for A&M and playing key roles. So I don't know how accurate that criticism is, but there's something to it, and it might be just one of those times where it's just time to move along, much like y'all had in basketball a few years ago, right up there.
Kevin Stallings, yeah,
right. A guy with some success, but not always consistent, able to handle, to continue it, and maybe it's just best for all parties involved is to try to, get some new scenery.
Well, for full disclosure, I've never been in Bluebell Park. Would love to go one day, hope to make that happen. But I watch it from TV. It looks like it's a beautiful venue. It's not very old. I mean, I know A&M's got just all kinds of money. I'm assuming there's no facilities issue here in Play to Blame.
Well, there are people here that feel like Bluebell Park could be better, and they want to expand it. And from what I understand, there's a waiting list for season tickets. So they wonder why they're keeping the capacity crowd at about 7,500, and why not go ahead and expand it into 10,000 plus? And I think there's going to be some plans to do that with the new coach. But no, it's a beautiful facility. The Bluebell Ice Cream Company donated quite a bit of money to upgrade Olson Field, and so there may be some stadiums, some baseball parks in the SEC that are as good, if not better, overall. But I really don't think it's something that the facilities are an issue. I think that, quite frankly, I don't know what you need as a baseball program to be very successful and be a championship caliber that Texas A&M doesn't provide.
Olin, I try not to take too much from one game or even one series of baseball early in the year, but I got a chance to watch a bit of Xavier and A&M on that first weekend. Frankly, it was a little bit jarring. I did not expect to see what I saw.
You're telling me.
Yeah. I'm guessing the fan base that you cover had that same reaction. Frankly, for a while, it felt like it was getting a little bit better than conference play hit, and Florida threw, frankly, a bucket of cold water on things from there, and it just kind of went downhill. But I want to ask you something. The pandemic changed things with the draft, with roster construction, things like that. Is there a case where, say things are normal in 2020, would that have changed things for Rob Childress, or was that just kind of the inevitable trajectory that the program had been on?
I don't know. Maybe if they had a really good year in 2020, but looking back, and I'd have to remind myself, but I don't recall them getting off to a particularly great start. I think they had just struggled in a tournament and lost maybe 3 games. I have to go back and refresh my memory, but I think, if my memory serves, that there was some frustration going on with the program last year before the pandemic break. Quite frankly, A&M under Childress for the most part has been led by really high level pitching, and then they've hit typically just enough, but they've always had a tendency to, or I should say always, they've quite often had a tendency to kick the ball around on the infield and actually have tendency to have really bad base running mistakes. So there was a lot of fundamental issues beyond pitching. And then this year, when you don't have high level pitching, maybe it's average, maybe just a little bit above average, and then you have like really one guy in the lineup who's a serious threat.
Will Frizzell, who was tremendous, by the way.
He's having I think, an All-American caliber year. Not, understanding that I don't know what everybody else across the country is doing, but he's got about 20 home runs and about 50 RBIs, and a lot of those home runs have been game winners. I don't know where they'd be without him, but so you got to be, except for him, you've got a pretty average at best lineup, probably below average, and just average and maybe slightly above average pitching. And so, you see the result is 2 games over 500 and lucky to have that. They had to come from behind to beat Tarleton State earlier this year, and that just should never happen.
Yeah, the talent was the thing that was pretty astonishing to me. I mean, I go back and look, Braden Shoemake, our last real glance at college baseball was 2019. I think all of us were sitting there in 2020. We kind of had on cruise control, like, we'll make our judgments when we get to the SEC season. That never happened. So our last glance at A&M baseball really had been that team and the team a couple years before, the shortstop whose name escapes me, who was really, I mean, A&M really had it going there for a while. And that team's bread was always buttered in pitching. And you go back again to 2019, we had Asa Lacy, who was a top 5 overall pick. And they had other guys. John Doxaxis was really good. Chris Webber was a really good arm for him. I mean, A&M just had arms for days. I mean, if you'd say who's going to assemble one of the deepest pitching staffs year in and year out, A&M was seemingly always on that list in terms of arms. What in the world happened this year? Because I look at what A&M was rolling out there at last glance in 2019 to this year, and other than the closer, I think Josiak, or however you pronounce his name, who was pretty good, I just did not see the level of pitching that I'm accustomed to seeing in that program.
Yeah, I think it just was one of those situations where maybe some guys had a bad year, maybe some guys just haven't developed the way you had thought, and maybe some guys just aren't quite ready yet. I know they have a freshman that beat Texas 2-0, and pitched really well, and they have some high hopes for him. But he was as inconsistent like freshmen tend to be, and so I think it was just, quite frankly, from the pitching standpoint, I would guess that sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes, for whatever reason, you have an off year. And I think that's what they had from the pitching standpoint. But again, when you're typically a soft hitting lineup, if you don't have that outstanding pitching, then you're in trouble. And I think that's, I don't want to call it the perfect storm and use that cliche, but everything just kind of fell apart together. They didn't have a good hitting team. They're not great. They're okay fielding team, but not great. They still make base running mistakes, and they don't have the pitching, the starting pitching to overcome it. And quite frankly, Josiak can't. If he was used up and couldn't pitch, say on a Sunday, they didn't often have bullpen help that they could rely on either.
Well, let's talk about where this is headed. A&M, certainly a school that I think has the resources to get an elite baseball coach. Who do you think the top names are realistically for this vacancy?
Well, I think they'd make a call up to Nashville, but I don't.
As
think
well they should, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, would anybody that could afford should actually make somebody say no, right? And they would get a no, and they understand that. I think the number, from what we hear, the number one target might be Tim Tadlock at Texas Tech. Recruits well from the Houston area. I know Jim Schlossnagel at TCU's been a thorn in A&M's side. But supposedly the Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported today that he said he's not going anywhere. Now, we know that sometimes coaches have a tendency to be less than truthful in situations like that. So I don't know if he couldn't change his mind or not. Maybe he knows that the job's already going to somebody else. You never know. I think they're going to look at Tennessee, Batelli. I think that's a guy they'd look at. So I would just speculate, and some of the things I've heard that when you talk about realistic targets, that those would be the maybe three guys at the top of Ross George's list.
Give me a name or two, maybe outside that, if you can think of one, that maybe there's a connection there that if the top tier falls through, that they might look at.
Oh gosh, I've heard it. Is it? I know that they would like, anybody would be interested in the guy at Louisville, and I'm not as.
Yeah, his name comes up anywhere and everywhere. Dan McDonald. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I would say that they would I wouldn't doubt if they would even approach Sullivan at Florida and say, hey, what would it take? And people might laugh, but they laughed 3 years ago when they approached Jimbo Fisher and said, what would it take? I would think, I think there's a guy, and I think he's at East Carolina. And I could be wrong.
Cliff Godwin. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a guy that from, that they could also look at, that I've actually heard the name come up, and even the old Oregon State coach, whose name I can't remember, but he won a couple national championships, who's retired. I wouldn't completely discount them trying to contact him if they can't get, maybe who their first couple of targets are. But I know this, they, like you said, A&M will pay. And then they'll offer. They have a lot to offer. They have they have tremendous fan support. But baseball is the number 2 sport here, ahead of basketball, without a doubt. So you're going to have tremendous fan support. You're going to have great. You're going to have great facilities, and quite frankly, you could do all your recruiting and still be home for dinner every night, because you're going to do most of it in Houston, Dallas, and Austin's actually a really good baseball area too, and down into San Antonio. So you don't have to go too far to recruit a whole lot of players.
I want to ask you a minute about basketball before we end here, because that is a program that just from afar, I'm having a trouble getting a read on. I mean, the season last year was disappointing. Maybe that was explainable. The A&M loses its best player in the transfer portal. I thought that was a really good hire when A&M got Buzz Williams, but that program for me is really hard to get a read on right now with where it's headed. What's your sense of where things are going there?
I think it's going to be better. I really do. Look, I'll be as brutally honest as I can. They were bad last year because they had a lot of bad players. They're good players, were guys you couldn't count on. So Buzz Williams was very honest. He said our goal on each possession is to use as much of the shot clock as we can to shorten the game, and then try to get the ball on the rim. Not try to score, not try to make the basket, but try to get on the rim so maybe they could get an offensive rebound and put back, or at least take some more time off the shot clock. They were a team that just quite frankly can't shoot, and they didn't have the inside presence like they had with Josh Nebo the previous year. They brought in a guy from Quinnipiac who had led the nation in rebounds the previous year, Kevin Marfo, and he just was not good enough to play in the SEC. It's just as brutally honest as you can be. Now, Savion Flagg was a guy that was on some preseason All-SEC teams, and great guy, super guy, and he has the ability to score 20 points a game, but he would score 5 or 6 in 4 games for every one time he's over 20. So just guys that you couldn't count on. Now, they've got to transfer. They lost. You mentioned Emmanuel Miller, their best player last year, and he's transferring to TCU. And they lost about, I think, 9 guys have transferred out. But they brought in. They've got the guys transferring in. They've got a guy who was from Wyoming, who was the Mountain West Freshman of the Year. They got a guy from Northeastern who was a freshman All-American coming in. They've got a guy from Connecticut, a 7-footer. A guy who was a backup at Arkansas coming in, another junior college transfer that did real well. They got a 5-star freshman coming in. So I really believe that they're going to be a more talented team than they were last year. Doesn't say a lot because, again, quite frankly, they had some great guys that played hard and gave you everything they had. They just didn't have a whole lot to give you.
Well, you talked about the philosophy last year of milking the shot clock and just getting the ball to the rim. That's not a philosophy that probably is the easiest one to sell on the recruiting trail. Was that more just a product of the situation and the talent last year,
Absolutely.
Or is that what he wants him to be going forward?
Oh, no. He wants to that's not absolutely not what he wants to be. He wants to move the ball up and down the floor, play really strong defense, but move the ball and get up and down. And one of the guys that did stay is Quentin Jackson. And I know people don't know a lot about the players at A&M because there's not a lot of reason to really focus on the Aggies. But Quentin Jackson's a guy from Los Angeles, a junior college transfer a couple years ago. That's the type of guy that runs. He's best in a game where you're going to push the ball. He gets a lot of highlight reel dunks and things like that. That's the kind of player he is. And he was a fish out of water in what they were trying to do last year. I mean, he's a guy that can probably shoot 28% from 3-point line, and he might have a good game where he hit 3 or 4, but he's not an outside shooter. That's not his game. And Buzz was able to convince him to stay. And I don't know how hard he tried to convince anybody else to stay, but he was able to convince him to stay by telling him, look, we got guys coming in that's going to make us where we can play a style that's more conducive to your game. So I just, with almost sight unseen, I believe A&M is going to be a more talented basketball team next season than they were last year. Because, again, I mean, they lost guys that transferred out, and they went to Sam Houston, and one went to, I think, South Alabama and some other small schools. And, again, A&M's getting in guys that played at the major college level and actually played pretty well. So we'll see if they can all come together and be a good team. But there's going to be more individual talent. I have no doubt about that.
Olin, thank you so much for your time today. Tell the folks about what's going on at Tex Ags and the gazillion things you guys do. And I just want to, I don't even know that I can keep track of them all, but I'll give you a minute to sum that up, please.
Well, we do a lot of coverage of Texas A&M sports, of course, and we've got podcasts and radio program, and we do videos. So we like to think of ourselves as the preeminent source of information for Texas A&M sports. And if you want to give us a check out, we'd appreciate it. The website is texags.com. It's just an abbreviated version of Texas Aggies, texags.com.
All right. He's Olin Buchanan from texags.com. Olin, thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you again soon.
Great talking to you, Chris. Always enjoy visiting with you.